He kept a secret file on everything that could kill him in this helicopter. On January 8, 2014, one of them did. For years, he'd built that file at home, late at night, skipped maintenance, cut corners. Every reason he thought this aircraft was going to get someone killed. Once again, he climbed into one of those helicopters for yet another training flight. 2.5 hours later, it stopped being one. This is the true story of the crash of Vulcan 543. Welcome to Tragic Flights. Every tragedy has a story, every disaster has a cause, and every flight leaves lessons behind. If you never want to miss the stories behind these events, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes of Tragic Flights. Let's begin. To understand what happened to Vulcan 543, you first need to understand what it actually was. The MH-53E Sea Dragon is the heaviest helicopter the US military has ever flown. 3 engines, nose to tail, with the rotors turning, it stretches nearly 100 feet. It's a stretched, heavier cousin of the Marine Corps' MH-53E, built with extra fuel tanks bolted to its sides so it can stay airborne for hours without landing. That endurance exists for one reason: mine countermeasures. Sea Dragon crews fly low, sometimes barely 100 feet above the ocean, dragging heavy sonar and detonation gear behind them, hunting for mines that could sink a warship before it ever left port. It's slow, thankless, repetitive work. And for decades, the Sea Dragon has been the only aircraft in the Navy built to do it. Flying that low leaves almost no margin for error. There is no altitude to recover if something goes wrong. Whatever happens up there happens fast, and it happens right there over open water. By January 2014, the Sea Dragons doing this job were already old. Some had been flying since the early 1980s, asking Cold War-era machines to keep performing one of the most physically demanding jobs in naval aviation. On the morning of the 8th, one of those aircraft, call sign Vulcan 543, rolled out of Naval Station Norfolk for what looked like any other day on the schedule. Nothing about the day looked unusual. One member of the crew had reason to feel otherwise. Wes Van Dorn never actually wanted to be a pilot. He was afraid of heights. He graduated the Naval Academy in 2007, hoping to become a Navy SEAL, and made it through the brutal first week of training before instructors cut him. When it came time to pick a new path, a friend told him flying Sea Dragons was about the most family-friendly job in naval aviation: steady schedules, fewer deployments. Van Dorn was a family man. That sold him. By January 2014, Lieutenant Wes Van Dorn was the pilot in command of Vulcan 543. His co-pilot that morning was another lieutenant, Sean Snyder. 3 more crew rounded out the flight, including Naval Air Crewman Brian Collins and Petty Officer Dylan Boone, the men whose job was to run the mine-sweeping gear and watch the tow cable from the back of the aircraft. 5 men, 1 routine mission off Virginia Beach. Van Dorn had joined this squadron, based at Naval Station Norfolk, back in 2010. It didn't take him long to start noticing things he didn't like. After arriving, Van Dorn took over as the squadron's maintenance officer, the guy responsible for keeping these aging aircraft airworthy. What he found troubled him. Skipped maintenance steps. Spare parts so scarce that mechanics sometimes cannibalized one grounded Sea Dragon just to keep another one flying. At any given time, only a handful of the squadron's helicopters were actually ready to fly. That scarcity wasn't an accident either. The Navy had actually planned to retire the Sea Dragon more than a decade earlier, pouring money into smaller helicopters meant to take over the mine-hunting mission. That plan failed. The Sea Dragon stayed in service, but the suppliers who made their spare parts had already moved on, assuming the aircraft was headed for a scrapyard. Van Dorn pushed back anyway. He double-checked logs. He caught corners being cut. But he was a junior officer trying to change a culture that had gotten comfortable with good enough. And a lieutenant only carries so much weight against years of institutional habit. At home, he kept building his case regardless. Private notes, essays, spreadsheets tracking discrepancies, all with his wife's help. He told her more than once, in different words, the same basic thought. He needed to fix what was broken before it got someone killed. including, possibly, him. He had no way of knowing how little time he actually had left to do it. The numbers backed Van Dorn's problems. Since the Sea Dragon entered service in the early 1980s, the Navy had grounded the entire fleet at least 5 separate times after discovering design flaws serious enough to stop flying altogether. By 2014, the aircraft's mishap rate ran roughly 3 times the Navy aviation average. That wasn't a one-year fluke either. It had been trending that direction for a while, even as the Navy leaned harder on these same aging airframes to do a job nothing else in the fleet could. Vulcan 543 would become the 18th major non-combat disaster involving a Sea Dragon since the type was introduced. In July 2012, an MH-53E had gone down in a canyon in Oman, killing 2 crew members. The investigation that followed forced the Navy to publicly admit something uncomfortable. Years of shrinking budgets and low attention had let the whole program slide. Leadership, maintenance, operations, all of it needed fixing. Even the Navy's own top admiral would later concede the Sea Dragon was too old for the job and say he wanted it retired as soon as realistically possible. But that depended on new mine-hunting technology that was, at the time, years behind schedule. For now, the fix was smaller. Better sensors to catch failing parts early. More maintenance staff. More pilot training. The squadron's own commander told reporters the investment was paying off. The program, he said, was finally back on the right track. He said that in October of 2013, October to January, 3 months. That's how long it took between a Navy commander telling reporters this program had turned a corner and Vulcan 543 catching fire 100 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. Nobody grounded the fleet in those 3 months. No new red flag went up. On paper, the Sea Dragon program really did look like it was improving. The flaw that would bring down Vulcan 543 wasn't new though. It had been sitting inside every Sea Dragon in the fleet, undetected, for years, because in nearly 3 decades of flying this aircraft, the Navy had never once required anyone to specifically inspect its wiring or fuel lines for wear. Not once. Whatever back on track meant in October, it didn't include the one thing that was actually about to kill 3 men. Before the day all of this happened, brutal cold had frozen the squadron's helicopters solid on the open flight line. This time, with the wind chill again dropping into the single digits, the crews kept their aircraft inside overnight. Van Dorn got to the hangar early to make sure his assigned helicopter was ready. During pre-flight checks, the cabin heater kept cutting out, and it was far too cold to fly comfortably without it. Nobody treated it as a reason to scrub the flight. Mechanical quirks were just part of flying this aircraft. They'd make it work. That late morning, Vulcan 543 lifted off Naval Station Norfolk alongside a second Sea Dragon. Both aircraft headed out to run mine countermeasure training roughly 18 miles off Virginia Beach. Vulcan 543 would tow an acoustic mine-sweeping device through the Atlantic, while the crew in back monitored the cable and the readings. Routine. Tedious. Nothing that looked from the outside like anything worth worrying about. About an hour into the flight, a fire warning light flickered on in the cockpit. Van Dorn asked one of the crew in back to check the engines for smoke. It wasn't an unusual request. Morning sunlight glinting off the horizon can sometimes trip these sensors by mistake. One crewman leaned out into the freezing slipstream and checked. The sky was clear. Nothing looked wrong. "We're all clear," he reported back and returned to his position. Everyone went back to work. The tow cable held steady. Nobody on board knew that a few feet away, hidden inside the cabin wall, a worn fuel line had already been quietly rubbing against a bundle of old electrical wiring for who knows how long. That warning light wasn't the danger. It just hadn't found it yet. Roughly 2.5 hours into the flight, it happened for real. Something gave way. The fire didn't build slowly. It exploded. One crewman near the back felt the blast before he even saw the flame. Someone, thinking the trouble was the broken heater, shouted for it to be shut off. It wasn't the heater. Fire tore forward into the cockpit. Thick black smoke filled the cabin in seconds, the kind that doesn't just choke you, it blinds you completely. Someone grabbed a fire extinguisher. Someone else went for the oxygen bottles. Up front, Van Dorn and Snyder never had time to call for help. Blind, burning, disoriented, they lost control of the aircraft. Less than 20 seconds after the fire started, Vulcan 543 hit the Atlantic tail first. The second Sea Dragon flying nearby saw it happen and radioed immediately for help, then stayed circling overhead to mark the crash site for rescuers. Below the surface, the outcome for each man came down to seconds and geography. Sean Snyder, in the co-pilot's seat, was pinned inside the cockpit as the aircraft sank. He had no way out. Brian Collins is believed to have died on impact. His body surfaced shortly after. 3 men made it out of the sinking wreckage alive: Van Dorn, Petty Officer Dylan Boone, and a third crewman. All 3 had to fight their way out of a helicopter that was actively going under, filling with freezing water, in the same chaos that had just cost 2 of their crewmates any chance at all. Now, it was a race against cold water and time. A rescue swimmer pulled Van Dorn from the 45-degree water roughly 30 minutes after the crash. He was alive, conscious even, fighting the medics trying to help him as they rushed him to Centara Norfolk General Hospital. For Van Dorn's wife, the first sign was a text from a friend who'd already seen the news. Hours passed before anyone told her anything official at all. For a moment, at the hospital, it looked like her husband might actually make it. He was conscious. He was fighting. But his injuries were terrible. Severe burns, severe hypothermia, and more damage than his body could recover from. That afternoon, just over a month shy of his 30th birthday, Lieutenant Wes Van Dorn died from his injuries. Sean Snyder's body remained lost inside the submerged cockpit for nearly a week. It took a remotely operated vehicle, a Navy salvage ship, and divers working through rough winter weather to finally locate the wreckage and bring him home. 2 of the 5 men aboard Vulcan 543 walked away. 3 did not. What investigators still had to nail down was exactly what had failed and why nobody caught it in time. 2 separate reviews ran side by side. A formal Jagman inquiry to reconstruct exactly what happened, and a confidential safety investigation digging into the aircraft itself. A fuel transfer line inside the cabin wall behind the cockpit had been chafing against a bundle of electrical wiring, probably for years. Eventually it wore through. Fuel met exposed wire. It ignited, and the fire spread through the cabin in seconds, filling it with the kind of smoke that leaves a crew completely blind. Once that fire started, there was almost nothing the crew could have done differently. The disorientation that caused the crash wasn't really the failure. It was the inevitable result of a failure that had already happened minutes earlier, out of anyone's sight. The real story was what came before it. 3 decades of flying Sea Dragons without ever requiring anyone to specifically inspect this exact failure point. Of course, the Navy corrected that immediately. Every MH-53E and CH-53E still able to fly was inspected. Investigators found damaged fuel lines on 28 of the fleet's 153 aircraft. Every one of them was replaced. A new permanent inspection schedule was created, the kind that should have existed decades earlier. That fixed the wiring. It didn't fix how old the rest of the aircraft was getting. Van Dorn's squadron, helicopter mine, countermeasures. Squadron 14 kept flying Sea Dragons for almost another decade after Vulcan 543. It flew its last operational mission in December 2022 and was formally deactivated the following year, training every pilot and aircrewman who came through its doors under the inspection rules his death had forced into existence. The Sea Dragon itself wasn't far behind. In March 2025, the Navy's training squadron for the aircraft stood down, closing the book on new pilots ever qualifying on it. leaving one remaining operational squadron to fly the type out. Its replacement isn't a single new helicopter. It's a mix of manned and unmanned systems, some of them still being tested. Full retirement of the Sea Dragon is expected by 2027. Nearly 45 years after it first entered service, the aircraft Van Dorn once worried might get somebody killed is finally leaving the fleet for good. Rest in peace to Lieutenant Wes Van Dorn, Lieutenant Sean Snyder, and Naval Air Crewman Brian Collins. If this story moved you, make sure to share it, leave a like, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode of Tragic Flights.